Remember when the future of television was held together by duct tape and network executives who had no idea what they were looking at? From 1966 to 1969, Star Trek aired on NBC, a scrappy science fiction series about the crew of the USS Enterprise, exploring strange new worlds while quietly sneaking philosophy past the censors. Created by Gene Roddenberry, the show starred William Shatner as the swaggering Captain James T. Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as the coolly logical Spock, and DeForest Kelley as the perpetually irritated Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy. The sets were wobbly, the budget was pretty tight, the networks wanted it dead, and somehow it changed everything. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about Star Trek you didn't know, from secret sabotage and royalty schemes to fan revolts and actual space burials. Before we jump in, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps the algorithm boldly go where it hasn't gone before. Now stick around for number one, because one of the most important figures in American history personally stopped Nichelle Nichols from quitting the show. Now, let's beam into this countdown. Number 15. Gene Roddenberry's final mission was literally space. Gene Roddenberry spent his life dreaming about space, starships, futures. Then, after he died, space came and picked him up. The first trip happened quietly in 1992, when a small portion of his ashes flew aboard STS-52 on the Space Shuttle Columbia. It orbited Earth for days, then came home. It was a test run, basically. Even in death, Roddenberry eased into the future. The real leap came in 1997. That year, Roddenberry became part of the first ever commercial space burial. His remains were launched into orbit alongside counterculture icon Timothy Leary. It's an eclectic passenger list, to say the least. The capsule circled Earth for 5 years before burning up in the atmosphere in 2002, turning into a literal shooting star. It's pretty on brand. Then, things got sneaky. In 2008, a portion of James Doohan's ashes was secretly smuggled onto the International Space Station by space tourist Richard Garriott and quietly stashed under the floor of the Columbus module, where he remains to this day. Engineers helping engineers, even in orbit. Then came the ultimate send-off. In January of 2024, a mission nicknamed Enterprise Flight launched aboard the Vulcan Centaur rocket. The remains of Roddenberry, Majel Barrett, Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, and DeForest Kelley were sent into permanent solar orbit around the sun. Star Trek promised a future among the stars, and decades later, it kept that promise. Number 14. Lucille Ball is the reason that Star Trek exists. Before Star Trek ever boldly went anywhere, it almost died quietly in a boardroom. The original 1965 pilot, The Cage, confused NBC executives, terrified accountants, and sent Desilu's leadership into full panic mode. Enter Lucille Ball. As co-owner and president of Desilu Productions, Lucy did something wildly irresponsible by corporate standards. She overruled her own board and approved funding for a second pilot. That almost never happened. The board hated the idea. The accountants warned that it could bankrupt the studio. One executive later admitted that everyone assumed that this weird space thing was just a terrible gamble. And here's the kicker. Lucy initially thought Star Trek was about entertainers traveling to visit troops overseas, basically like a USO show with nicer uniforms. When someone finally explained it involved spaceships, alien worlds, and a guy with pointy ears named Spock, she didn't flinch. She doubled down. Her insistence gave Gene Roddenberry the unheard-of second chance that produced Where No Man Has Gone Before, the pilot that actually sold the series. Without Lucy's clout, NBC never revisits it. Without that second pilot, there's no series order. The entire franchise, movies, conventions, 6 decades of internet arguments, owes its existence to one comedian that ignored her accountants, misunderstood the premise, and still said yes anyway. Former Desilu executives later put it bluntly that if it weren't for Lucy, Star Trek never makes it to air. That's the most Star Trek origin story imaginable. Bold, illogical, and somehow exactly right. Number 13. The original first officer was a woman. Before audiences ever met Spock, the original first officer aboard the Enterprise was a woman. In the 1965 pilot, The Cage, Majel Barrett played a character known only as Number One. She was calm, analytical, unemotional, and utterly pretty competent. NBC, though, they didn't like it. Network executives claimed audiences wouldn't accept a woman giving orders to men, especially one who wasn't warm, chatty, or differential. They also knew that Barrett was Gene Roddenberry's girlfriend, and they weren't thrilled about an unknown actress holding that much power on screen or off. So when NBC rejected The Cage for being too cerebral, Number One was quietly removed. But Roddenberry didn't actually kill the character. He split her in half. All of number one's cool logic, restraint, and intellectual authority got transferred directly into Spock. In the original pilot, Spock was more emotional and impulsive. After the rewrite, he became the hyper-logical figure we all know, because those traits originally belonged to her. Even more awkward was that Roddenberry later admitted that some of the harshest feedback came from female test audiences, who felt that number one was pushy or trying too hard. Faced with pressure to drop both Barrett and his, quote, satanic-looking alien, Roddenberry made a choice. He kept the Vulcan, and he married the woman. Barrett stayed on Star Trek as Nurse Christine Chapel and became the voice of the Enterprise computer, a role that she carried across multiple Trek series for decades. So while TV wasn't ready for a woman as first officer in 1965, the idea never really left the bridge. It just changed species. Number 12. The interracial kiss nearly got the show canceled. In 1968, Star Trek aired the episode Plato's Stepchildren, featuring a kiss between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols. Now, by today's standards, it's pretty tame. By 1960s network standards, it was DEFCON 1. NBC panicked. Executives feared massive backlash, especially from Southern affiliates, and demanded that the scene be reshot without the kiss. The solution? It was classic network logic. Film a safe version where the actors lean in but don't actually touch. Everyone goes home pretending progress didn't happen. Nichols and Shatner, though, they weren't interested. According to Nichols, the two actors deliberately sabotaged every no-kiss take. Crossed eyes, goofy expressions, awkward timing, anything to make the footage unusable. In one final attempt, Shatner reportedly stared straight into the camera and delivered his lines like a man daring the editors to try and use it. They ran out of time, they ran out of money, and suddenly the only usable footage was the real kiss. NBC braced for disaster, but it never came. Instead of outrage, the network received overwhelmingly positive mail. Many viewers wrote in saying that they didn't understand what the fuss was about. The audience was already ahead of the executives trying to protect it. Number 11. The Vulcan salute came from Leonard Nimoy's childhood. The Vulcan salute came from Leonard Nimoy just being a curious kid in a synagogue. Growing up in Boston, Nimoy attended an Orthodox synagogue with his family. During a sacred ritual called the priestly blessing, the congregation was instructed to look away or close their eyes. According to tradition, the Shekinah, the divine presence, was believed to descend at that moment. You were not supposed to watch. But naturally, Nimoy peeked. The priests, known as the Kohanim, held their hands out with their fingers split into a distinct V shape. Now that shape formed the Hebrew letter Shin, symbolizing Shaddai, one of the names of God. It was solemn, it was ancient and powerful, and it burned straight into the child's memory. Decades later, while filming the Season 2 premiere, Amok Time, the production needed a Vulcan greeting. Nimoy stepped in, and he suggested the gesture he remembered from childhood. Director Joseph Pevney agreed, and just like that, the ancient religious symbol had quietly crossed into science fiction. Nimoy later said one of his greatest joys was knowing that millions of fans around the world were unknowingly blessing each other every time they said, "Live long and prosper." Number 10. James Doohan was a real-life war hero. Before James Doohan ever became Montgomery Scott, or of course Scotty on Star Trek, he stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Doohan was a lieutenant in the Canadian Army, part of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, and he landed on Juno Beach on June 6th of 1944. Under fire, he led his men through a minefield and helped take out 2 German snipers. That alone would be enough for a war story people exaggerate at dinner parties. But then, it got worse. Later that night, while moving between command posts, Doohan was mistakenly shot 6 times by a nervous Canadian sentry. Friendly fire. 4 bullets hit his leg. 1 shattered his right middle finger, and 1 went straight for his chest. That last one should have killed him, but instead, it slammed into a silver cigarette case in his breast pocket. A gift from his brother. The kind of small, random object that you only appreciate when it literally stops a bullet. Doohan survived, but he did lose the finger. When he joined Star Trek as the Enterprise's chief engineer, he went to great lengths to hide the injury. Careful camera angles, strategic hand placement, hand doubles for close-up shots. He didn't want the audience distracted by the reminder. Now, most viewers never noticed, but a few eagle-eyed fans eventually caught glimpses, especially in The Trouble with Tribbles, where Scotty's missing finger briefly makes a cameo while he's buried in fluff. Turns out that the Enterprise's chief engineer really was the toughest guy in the room. Number 9. Fans saved the show twice. Now, long before hashtags, petitions, or rage tweeting, Star Trek accidentally invented modern fandom, and it did it in the hardest way possible. In late 1967, word leaked that NBC planned to cancel Star Trek after season 2. Fans, they did not accept this. Led by Trimble and her husband John, viewers launched an organized letter-writing campaign unlike anything television had seen. They used something called the Rule of 10. Write one letter to NBC and then convince 10 other people to do the same. And then those 10 recruit 10 more. It's pure analog chaos. The letters poured in. NBC officially acknowledged receiving over 116,000 letters. Unofficial estimates, including petitions and duplicate mailings, pushed that number past 1 million. It got so bad that NBC did something unheard of. They announced the show's renewal for a 3rd season during a network broadcast and politely asked fans to stop sending mail, please. The second wave came after cancellation. College students at Caltech, MIT, and Berkeley held torchlight marches with signs reading, quote, "It is totally illogical to cancel Star Trek." In the 1970s, fans lobbied NASA to name the first space shuttle Enterprise. They pushed studios toward revivals, conventions, and eventually, Star Trek, the motion picture. Star Trek didn't survive because the network believed in it. It survived because viewers refused to let it disappear quietly, years before fan movements were even a thing. Number 8, Tribbles became a production nightmare. The trouble with Tribbles was meant to be a fun detour for Star Trek, a goofy episode built around fuzzy aliens that multiplied uncontrollably and drove the crew of the Enterprise slightly insane. Now, on screen, it was just harmless chaos, but behind the scenes, it was a low-grade infestation. To create the illusion of endless Tribbles, production only built about 500 of them. They were simple props, right? Synthetic fur, foam rubber stuffing, and some with wind-up toy dog heads that were sewn inside so they could, quote, it was cheap, it was effective, and pretty adorable. And they were impossible to get rid of. Once filming wrapped, the Tribbles, they didn't leave. They'd show up weeks later in lighting rigs, drawers, vents, equipment cases, and places that no one remembered ever putting them. DeForest Kelley later confirmed that they just kept appearing, like fuzzy little jump scares for exhausted crew members. The problem only got worse because the crew, well, they thought it was hilarious. So people started hiding Tribbles in each other's costumes and bags. Kelley once pulled a Tribble out of a patient during a completely different episode just to break everyone on set. At that point, the props, they weren't multiplying anymore. They were unionizing. And then there was an avalanche scene. I mean, the moment when William Shatner opens a compartment and gets buried under a tidal wave of fur, and it took 8 takes. The crew dropping Tribbles from above couldn't see Shatner, so they just kept tossing more down just to be safe. And when the episode finally ended, many Tribbles mysteriously vanished into cast and crew collections. Others eventually landed in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Because the world's most prestigious institutions, they need space lint too. Hey, quick pause here on the bridge. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Star Trek's weirdest behind-the-scenes stories, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments which Trek fact surprised you the most so far. No red shirts will be harmed. Well, probably. All right, back to the mission. Number 7, the theme song made Roddenberry rich. The soaring theme to Star Trek, it feels pure, it's majestic, inspirational, like it was written by someone gazing at the stars with nothing but hope in their heart. That someone was composer Alexander Courage. But standing just off stage was Gene Roddenberry, doing some math. And here's how it worked. Courage's contract included a standard industry clause. If lyrics were added to the theme, the lyricist would legally be entitled to half of the performance royalties. So Roddenberry wrote lyrics. They weren't good lyrics, they weren't usable lyrics, but lyrics that were never meant to be sung on air. Lines like, "Beyond the rim of the starlight, my love is wandering in starflight." The kind of words that sound like they're written at 3 a.m. by someone staring at a lava lamp. But Roddenberry, they filed them anyway. That single act made him a co-composer in the eyes of the royalty system. So every time Star Trek aired anywhere in the world, half of the royalty check meant for Courage, well, it quietly went to Roddenberry instead. The lyrics were never used, but they worked perfectly, at least for Roddenberry. Courage was furious. He viewed that the move was legal but deeply unethical. The relationship between the two men, it never recovered, and Courage didn't return to score later seasons. Meanwhile, syndication kicked in, then reruns, then international broadcasts, then movies, then decades of cultural immortality. Those silent lyrics ended up earning millions for Roddenberry, and later, his estate. Number 6, Spock looked nearly demonic on screen. In the earliest makeup plans for Star Trek, Spock wasn't supposed to be green. Gene Roddenberry originally wanted him to have red skin to emphasize his alien nature. That idea lasted right up until someone saw how red makeup looked on 1960s black and white televisions. Instead of reading as alien, it came across as like dark, muddy gray, and uncomfortably close to resembling blackface too. Less logical Vulcan, more nightmare fuel. The network was already nervous. NBC executives thought Spock's pointed ears and sharply angled eyebrows made him look satanic. Not metaphorically, literally. Their solution was to airbrush him back into humanity. So early promotional photos actually removed Spock's ears and softened his eyebrows a bit to make him look more normal. The fix came from makeup artist Fred Phillips, who swapped the red for a yellow-green tint. On set, it looked fine, but then the film went to the lab, and technicians assumed something was wrong. So they color-corrected Spock back to a healthy human pink. This happened more than once. Even the lab kept thinking, surely this man isn't supposed to be green. And once the show aired, audiences, they didn't panic. They didn't see Satan. They saw the breakout star. Number 5, communicators inspired the cell phone. On Star Trek, the communicator, it was pure sci-fi magic. You just flip it open, say your name, talk instantly across impossible distances. Now, in the 60s, it looked like fantasy. Martin Cooper, the Motorola engineer who created the first handheld mobile phone in 1973, openly credited Star Trek as part of his inspiration. He'd seen Kirk use that communicator and thought, well, the real world deserves the same thing. Later, Cooper clarified the full truth. His actual childhood inspiration was the two-way wrist radio from Dick Tracy comics. That was the original spark, but when documentaries came calling and cameras started rolling, the Star Trek angle, it was just too good to resist. Cooper admitted that he leaned into it because, well, honestly, who wouldn't? Motorola leaned all the way in. When they released the StarTAC in 1996, the name alone was a love letter to the Enterprise. The clamshell design, that wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate nod to Kirk's communicator. Sci-fi aesthetics finally catching up to consumer electronics. Number 4, the girdle myth that won't die. There's a rumor about William Shatner that has outlived the original series. It survived 6 decades of syndication, and it embedded itself so deep into Trek lore that most fans treat it as established fact. The claim? That Shatner wore a girdle under his Starfleet tunic to keep Captain Kirk looking trim and camera ready. But he didn't. Shatner has flatly denied it, multiple times, in interviews, in books, and with the kind of exasperated patience that you'd expect from a man who spent half of a century being asked about his underwear. But the myth, it just refuses to die. Partly because 1960s network TV really did obsess about how leading men looked. Studios wanted heroes who were lean and square-jawed and physically flawless at all times. That pressure was real. The assumption that every actor must have been squeezing into something just to survive the close-ups, it's also real, but in this case, wrong. The rumor likely gained traction because fans noticed that Kirk's silhouette shifted slightly between seasons, which is what happens when a human being ages across 3 years of grueling television production. It's shocking. Apparently. From there, it snowballed. One offhand comment becomes a convention panel joke, and a convention panel joke eventually becomes an internet fact, and then the internet fact becomes something that people argue about in YouTube comments at like 2 in the morning as though they inspected personally the man's wardrobe. Now, Shatner has been pretty good-natured about it over the years, but the answer has always been the same. No girdle. Just a guy in a gold shirt doing his job. While millions of strangers spent decades scrutinizing his midsection like it was the Zapruder film. Number 3, Captain Kirk has an official future birthplace. In 1985, the people of Riverside, Iowa looked at the future and said, sure, that guy, he's ours. The guy, of course, was James T. Kirk. All anyone really knew came from a throwaway detail in the making of Star Trek, which mentioned Kirk was born in a small town in Iowa. So Riverside officially declared itself the future birthplace of James T. Kirk. The vote was unanimous. Gene Roddenberry, he gave his blessing, which turned Riverside into something uniquely Star Trek, unofficially official canon. Now, over time, the town leaned in. There's a Voyage Home Museum. There's a marker for where Kirk will be born. There's even a plaque at a local bar that marks the spot where he'll eventually be conceived. Every June, Riverside hosts TrekFest. Parades, costumes, panels, and visits from Trek royalty like William Shatner and George Takei. A real-world celebration for a future birthday that hasn't happened yet. Then came 2009. The Star Trek reboot finally made Riverside official canon, showing Kirk's Iowa origins on screen for the first time. Captain Kirk was born in the future, declared in the present, and confirmed decades later by Hollywood. Retroactive destiny. It's the most Star Trek thing imaginable. Number 2, Beam Me Up Scotty was never actually said. Beam Me Up, Scotty feels as real as the Enterprise itself. It's been printed on t-shirts, slapped on bumper stickers, shouted at elevators, and quoted by people who have never even seen a single episode of Star Trek. But there's just one problem. No one ever says it. Not once. Not in any of the show's 79 original episodes. Captain Kirk comes close. Very, very close. He says things like, "Scotty, beam us up," or "beam me up," or "Scotty, get us out of here." And the wording shifts constantly, depending on how much danger that the landing party is in at that exact moment. Even James Doohan eventually embraced the myth, titling his 1996 autobiography, "Beam Me Up, Scotty."
Scotty, beam us up fast.
At that point, correcting people, it would have been pointless. The phrase was bigger than the show itself. And number one, Martin Luther King Jr. saved Uhura. After season 1 of Star Trek, Nichelle Nichols was ready to walk away. She wanted to return to her first love, musical theater. Broadway had come calling, and her resignation, it was basically written. Then, she attended an NAACP fundraiser in Beverly Hills. During that event, a man approached her and introduced herself as her biggest fan. She smiled politely, until he added one small detail. He was Martin Luther King Jr. When Nichols mentioned that she was leaving the show, King, he didn't congratulate her. He stopped her cold. He told her that she couldn't quit, not because of contracts or fame, but because of what Uhura represented. For the first time on American television, a black woman, well, she wasn't playing a maid, a joke, or a background extra. She was intelligent, professional, respected, and she wasn't there to serve anyone. Then, he dropped the part that always gets people. King admitted that he was a genuine fan. He said Star Trek was the only show that he and Coretta Scott King allowed their children to stay up late to watch. This wasn't just entertainment to him. It was a glimpse of the future behaving better than the present. The following Monday, Nichols went back to Gene Roddenberry and withdrew her resignation. According to her, Roddenberry became emotional and said, "Finally, someone gets it." And that's how Uhura stayed on the bridge, because Martin Luther King Jr. personally explained that sometimes staying put is the most radical move that you can make. Well, and there you have it. 15 weird facts all about Star Trek. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who loves Trek. Until next time, this is Remember When.